was convened by a group of evolutionary biologists who are dissatisfied with the standard neo-Darwinian theory of evolution. And many of the conveners are calling for a new theory because the primary mechanism of biological change articulated by Darwin and his subsequent followers, now called the neo-Darwinists, the idea of natural selection acting on random mutations and variations, is now understood to lack the creative power to generate major changes in the history of life.
And is the crux of this debate, is it, as Tucker was getting at there, is it that if you actually start from where Darwin's theory begins, the creation of the human being was so complicated, the body, the way we exist is so complicated, it doesn't make any rational sense.
There's two issues, really. There's how do you get to the first life from the simpler non-living chemicals? That's sometimes called chemical evolutionary theory, and that's a complete mess. It's in a state of impasse, and almost everyone, even your recent guest, Richard Dawkins, acknowledges we have no chemical evolutionary theory that accounts for the origin of the first life. And many people don't know that Darwin didn't attempt to explain the origin of the first life. Rather, he presumed one or very few simple organisms, which we now know were not simple, and then proposed a mechanism by which you could generate all the new forms of life we see on the planet today. But even that now is being challenged because the main mechanism of evolutionary change does a nice job of explaining small-scale variation. What Tucker was referring to, I think, is adaptation. This would be examples like Darwin's finches, where the beaks get a little bigger, a little smaller in response to varying weather patterns. But it does a very poor job of explaining the major innovations in the history of life, such as the origin of birds or mammals or animals in the first place. And there in the fossil record, we do see very abrupt, many instances of very abrupt appearance without the transitional intermediates that you'd expect on the basis of the Darwinian picture of the tree of life.
So is your belief that the Darwin theory actually fails then?
I think it does fail. I think it captures an element of the truth. There's the small-scale microevolutionary variation is certainly a real process, and no one disputes that. Natural selection is a real process, but what's at issue now is the degree to which it has genuine creative power. And I think at this 2016 conference, the opening talk was given by a prominent Austrian evolutionary biologist, not an American talk show host, and he enumerated 5 major explanatory deficits of neo-Darwinism, many of them surrounding this problem that the mechanism lacks the generative or creative power necessary to account for the major innovations in the history of life.
Well, your best-selling book, new book, Return of the God Hypothesis, you argue there are 3 big scientific discoveries that point to the existence of God. I want to go through these. One, the Big Bang Theory. So why would that lend support to a theory of a God?
Well, right. Maybe just a little framing before I dive into the evidence. Professor Dawkins at Oxford has said that the universe has precisely the properties that we should expect if at bottom there is no purpose, no design, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. And though I'm on the opposite side of this science v. God issue with the good professor, I think he does a marvelous job of framing key issues. And this is one of those great framing quotations. Because what he's saying is that whether we think of it as a scientific question or a philosophical question or both, if we have a hypothesis about reality, the way we test that is by looking at the world around us and seeing if what we see comports with what we would expect to see if our hypothesis were true. And his hypothesis is that of blind, pitiless indifference, which is a shorthand way of saying that everything came about by strictly undirected material processes. And what the materialists expected coming into the early 20th century was evidence of an eternal, self-existent universe, one that had been here for an infinitely long time and therefore did not need an external creator. What, in fact, the astrophysicists, the cosmologists, the astronomers found was evidence of a universe that had a definite beginning, and therefore one that could not have created itself, because before the matter of the universe came into existence, there was no matter there to do the causing. And so the picture of the universe that has emerged starting from the 1920s all the way to the present, both from observational astronomy and from theoretical physics, is a universe that had a definite beginning and therefore requires some sort of external creator or cause.